The arguments here are multivariate. I've been engaged in it for days because everything we put out on social media. So I put out the Jackson post on LinkedIn and it caused vociferous debate. I was mentioning to you that this conversation on fiat, gold, central banks, no central banks is really akin to a religious discussion in that neither side is ever going to capitulate and they just are very firmly entrenched in their perspectives. I will say that the anti-central banking perspective takes a little bit of original thinking and creativity because the other side is what is the orthodoxy, right? Everyone is taught central banking is good, it's great. No one ever stops to ask, we don't accept government centralized control of any market in the West. We don't like it. So why do we accept government centralized control and like communist style controls of the money market?
Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I have a new guest today. His name is Arie van Gemeren. He's a principal and founder of Lombard Equities. Lombard Equities is a private real estate investment company focused on acquiring well-located value-added apartments across the west coast of the U.S. But also importantly, he's the founder and writer of Timeless Investor Group, and he also posts stuff on Substack. I'm going to leave all this stuff in the description. And he's also a former banker with Goldman Sachs, just like I'm a former banker in the city of London. But I read some an interesting article from Arie called Blood and Taxes about why revolutions start with real estate, and he focused on the French Revolution. And I've also listened to a podcast he made about Andrew Jackson and how Andrew Jackson slayed the monster, which was the second bank of the United States. But Arie, welcome.
Thank you, Mario. Pleasure to be here and excited to share some insights and have a collaborative conversation on a broad range of topics. So, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I really enjoy how you look at history, and it's something that I do a lot because I think history doesn't repeat exactly. I know it's a cliche, but it rhymes.
It
So
rhymes.
yeah. So could we start with the like the route to the French Revolution and what you mean by blood and taxes and what you mean by the French Revolution uh, being not a revolution about people going hungry, but about real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's a commonality in when you think about, and actually to go back to the root, the even the further root of this, the the story of most revolutions and most discord in society comes down to have your intrinsic rights kind of been taken from you, have your property rights been violated in some form. And in this article and in many other writings, I talk a lot about the Gracchi brothers under the Roman Republic, various different situations in which people attempted to protect and preserve property rights for the masses, and they were taken away, and it inevitably led to the downfall of empire or the crash of the country. Or I can talk about the Emperor Romanus Diogenes in the Byzantine Empire, who lost the Battle of Manzikert because he tried to control property rights for the people, and his nobles betrayed him at the battle, which was ultimately led to the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire. It is a trend that continues throughout time. So, taking that lens, what happened with the Gracchi brothers, how that led to the fall of the Roman Republic, the rise of Caesar, the rise of various dictators, and then the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire ultimately destroyed the Roman Senate, who were the ones that defeated the Gracchi brothers. The same with the Battle of Manzikert and the Emperor Romanus attempting to preserve property rights backfired on the nobles who betrayed him at that battle and allowed the Turks to conquer Anatolia and eventually overwhelm Constantinople and change the course of European history over property rights. So, taking that lens, I wanted to look at the French Revolution. And one could argue that the Russian Revolution, is a good example too, where people had no rights. And this comes back to the fiat currency point a little bit, which is it's okay if you have no rights, if you have trust in the system, right? So people had implicit trust in the French monarchy and the goodness of the monarchy and the divine right of kings and whatnot. So the peasantry was okay with it, right? But you had the rise of the Enlightenment and different ideas, and people started to question the intrinsic trust in monarchical systems. In conjunction with that, the French Revolution, in my opinion, the seeds of it were really planted decades before with John Law, who's another I call him gentleman lightly, another person that we did a podcast interview on. And John Law was a murderer, gambler, kind of a fascinating genius, if you will, Scottish, who fled England after murdering someone in a duel over a woman. And he was a very kind of prolific playboy and went to France and came up with this idea of France paying its own debts off by producing fiat currency. So he was like almost the grandfather of central banking and fiat, and culminated in a mass inflation and this idea that Mississippi and the French regions of the New World were going to produce all these great benefits, but ultimately led to mass inflation and the death of paper currency for a time. And then French society started to sort of unravel after that point. And so France had incurred tremendous debt, which, again, there's commonalities. Like the Tsar fell in the Russian Revolution after incurring tremendous debt and tremendous loss of life in World War One, and trust in the Tsar and his divine capabilities fell. The French monarchy went through the same chain, right? Assistance to the Americans in the American Revolution, the 7 Years' War, right, which was really the first global war. We think World War One's the first world war, but actually the 7 Years' War was really the first world war. And that led to this point where people started to question why they had no rights. They paid all the taxes, they had none of the land, and they were restricted from an ownership in society, which to me was almost the spark that led to this problem. If the French peasantry and middle class had had equivalent rights and access to land, you don't have an incentive to blow the system up. Instead, you're part of the system and you want to protect the system. So this is a trend you see throughout time in every empire and every story, and it's one that we're unfortunately, I think we're going through our own version of today in the United States, England as well, where property rights are slowly being impinged, either legally or by the force of fiat debasement and asset prices rising faster than wages rise, and so people don't have a stake in society anymore. So that's the throughput, in my opinion, from like, and I'm sure there's many, many more examples across time. But hopefully that answers the question relatively succinctly.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great to look at history and what you said there, but we also want to bring it to modern day society and economy. And I've got a chart here, which you might have looked at in the past, but I always look at it. It's actually provided by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. And the reason I bring it up, it's because it's a distribution of household wealth since 1989 in the US. And if you look at the top 1%, they own 30.5% of all the wealth. And the top 10, they own over 70%. But what's more shocking, Ari, is the bottom 50 only won 1.6%, while back in, I mean, 1989, it wasn't great, but it was 3.5%. And I think it's not just fiat currency that does that. Uh, as you said, the fiat currency, I think it helps the people nearest to the printing press is like the Cantillon effect. But
Right.
I also think a lot of the laws and the tax laws and tax codes, which are influenced by lobby groups, by the powerful, the wealthy and powerful, that doesn't help either. And here in the UK, for example, now we've got the Labour government, and I'm not saying the previous conservatives, they were in power for 14 years, were any better, but we're seeing like a lot of talk of attack on real estate or property. And there's an old saying about an Englishman's castle is his home. So they're talking now about a capital, not a capital gains, but a wealth tax on properties worth more than 500,000 pounds, which is
Hmm.
most of the southeast of England,
Yeah.
especially Greater London. Uh, and yeah, there's more. They've put inheritance tax on small farmers or big farmers. The very wealthy are leaving, but they can afford to leave and they have the wherewithal to leave. And what I think is happening here, and maybe you can talk about the US as well, is that they're going more and more after people's real estate and property.
Yeah.
And people are getting restless. So I, I think the French Revolution could be something that sparks again
Yep.
in Western Europe and in the US. What do you think? Am I exaggerating, or do you think there's a danger of that?
Well, this is a very multi-layered question. Do I think we'll have the return of guillotines and, the reign of terror? I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't want to say no. You can never say never. I mean, these things happen inevitably in history. They come around again and again. What I will say is the chart you showed on wealth inequality is really relevant. So, unfortunately, that chart doesn't go back to 1900. However, the last period in which wealth inequality was at the level it was today was, I believe, the end of the 20s. And there's a fair amount of research to indicate that when wealth disparity is at a peak, you have a rise in extreme political philosophies, generally because people feel left behind by the system. And then you have fascism, you have communism kind of rising back up because people feel a need to blow the system up because they're like, I can't get ahead. It's not fair. The haves are ahead of me and I can't get ahead of the system. And one could argue, I mean, there's many, again, I think it's easy to sort of try to like find a monocausal event for things. Obviously, everything has many, many causes, right? Like I just got a debate this morning about the Fed and I said, well, it's easy to say the Fed is responsible for everything. There's obviously many different factors. It's not just the Fed, right? Same thing with World War II. Obviously, World War One was a major causal factor of World War II, but arguably rising wealth inequality and the brutal reparations placed on Germany and different factors led to the rise of extreme political philosophies, which we're starting to see today. So I feel like today we are starting to see more far left and far right philosophies making a push into society. So, for example, this Zoran gentleman in New York City, fairly far left mayor, right? And he would historically never have had a chance of being elected, but people in Manhattan probably feel like they can't get ahead and they want to blow the system up. They want to do something completely different. And I'm not saying I agree or disagree with his politics. I'm not really here for politics in general, but it is indicative of rising political discord. And so that, and people forget that the Nazis were elected in Weimar Germany in a Republican system of election with a minority of the vote. And they were still elected, and it was an extreme political philosophy. And then it kind of took over a democracy. That could easily happen again. And certainly what happened in the aftermath of that election was not good, right? And resembles the French Revolution, except worse in many ways for many, many people across Europe. So, do I think we're going there? I don't know. I don't think it's inevitable. I don't think anything's inevitable per se. But what I think is inevitable is once you allow powers to be to have access to the printing press to continue to print their way out of problems, you are going to inevitably create wealth disparity because that inevitably benefits asset owners. And it's interesting. Like my initial reaction to what you're saying on the efforts in England to increase taxes and do this different things is negative, right? I always think it's a negative thing. On the other hand, many of these efforts they make are an attempt to solve the wealth inequality issues we're facing at the same time, which are generally dangerous for society. So they serve a dual purpose, right? One could argue they're just punishing the wealthy. One could also argue they're trying to solve wealth inequality. And so, what's the right way to do it? But I think we're operating in an economic paradigm of in the West at least, and certainly I think China's under the same exact thing of just printing, 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 and using debt to try to get herself out of trouble, which inevitably leads to problem. Like it is relatively inevitable that something bad will happen. Like once you start debasing, it does like there's no historic analog where like things got better, right? It doesn't happen. I guess the only real example would be when the Emperor Constantine the Great won the battle, converted the Roman Empire to Christianity, and then put in place a new hard currency for the Eastern Roman Empire that actually solved many of the inflationary issues. But the Western Roman Empire still collapsed and fell in the aftermath of that, and rampant currency debasement over that time. So um, I don't know. There's history is pretty bleak when it comes to this particular topic. So I don't want to sound like a pessimist, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, you mentioned Constantine. Is it the Battle of what's that bridge called in Rome? Um,
It is the Battle of a Bridge. I forget
yeah, I
which
forgot.
one.
I was there earlier this year and last year. But yeah, that's where he saw the sign as well that made
Correct.
him convert. But yeah, it seems to me, like you said, that you can kind of understand the people, especially on the left. For example, there's an MP here in the UK who's advising the Chancellor of the Exchequer now because she's going to come up with the budget in October and November, and he's very lefty. Uh, and I can understand, the very wealthy are not even the very wealthy, but upper middle class. Their real estate value of their property that is going through the roof, and young people can't get on the property ladder, as they call it here in the UK.
Yeah,
But what is frustrating, Ari, is that none of them, not even maybe a little bit more on the right, realize that one of the major reasons for this is the fiat currency system that
exactly.
really helps people who have assets and really hurts the common, and the majority. So with that, maybe we can move now to like the Federal Reserve and also Andrew Jackson and what you think is the best course of action for us, like people like you and me and the viewers and people who aren't like at the top, who aren't central bankers or
Yeah,
CEOs of, in protecting their assets. So one thing you said about Andrew Jackson and what he did in the 1830s, he defeated the monster, which is the second bank of the United States, but he also uh, that victory was kind of a Pyrrhic victory because eventually he helped create an even greater monster, and
right.
that was really interesting because I never thought of that, and I'm not saying I want a central bank, but yeah, maybe, yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah. Well, I want to hit on one point too, which I love the point that you made, which is they are trying the left wing politicians are generally trying to solve this wealth inequality effect, but I do agree with you. I think they're going at it from the wrong approach. The reason wealth inequality is rising is because fiat is debased, which hurts savers, encourages riskier behavior, right? So one of the things that is worth thinking about is fiat debasement incentivizes the use of debt because debt is constantly devalued over time. So therefore, it has all sorts of distortionary impacts on how people invest. And it has a hugely distortionary impact on real estate because real estate is primarily financed with debt, which means this is nerve-wracking for me, who, am building my entire company and business on the back of real estate. But the truth is, real estate values are where they are today because of the easy utilization of debt and because fiat has been debased over time, which means that it vastly encourages risk taking and it encourages riskier behavior with loans. And so trying to solve that by just taxing the gains is sort of not getting at the root problem. And there's a great website. I don't know if you've ever linked it for your listeners, but it's WTFhappenedin1971.com. It's a fantastic website, tons of great charts. But it shows very clearly that when the US broke the gold standard in 71, everything went to hell afterwards in ways that are really bad for the middle class. And my wife always says the middle class in the West are the ones that get crushed horrifically. The poor, they're fine. It's difficult to be poor, but there's a lot of government programs for you. And the rich, they're also fine. It's the middle class that get crushed for health in this country, in the United States, anyways, for health insurance. Yes. Have you been here before? Have you been to this site?
Actually, no, I haven't looked at it, and I didn't know about it. But I notice whenever I look at a lot of charts, and in the early 70s, everything changes. So yeah,
This site is the holy grail of incredible information. There's one I want to point out here really quickly as you keep scrolling, um, that basically shows the time it takes for an American to save up their money to buy a home. And it's fascinating. It's I mean, basically it's 3 to 4 times as much time. There, right here.
oh,
How
there
long
you
does it
go.
take to save for a house?
Yeah.
Very consistent and stable before, and you can see that you basically have to dedicate 5 more years of your life today, roughly, to save for a home than you did in 1970, which is the problem, is one of the huge problems. And this effect right here is very alarming to me because whether or not buying a home is a good investment, it is perceived as as a stable way to build a life, build a family, be part of society. And the more people feel like they cannot access that lifestyle, the more they will lean into extreme political philosophies, which is not good for Western style democracy and capitalism. I think this is a huge problem. And that I'm glad you pulled up the charts. That website is amazing. I use it all the time. It's awesome. But that exactly. So anyways, now we could I just wanted to hit that point really quickly. So Jackson. Um so it's interesting. So yes, he defeated the monster, the second bank of the United States. But arguably created an ecosystem where there were more recessions and more crashes and more problems that kind of arose out of this. And yes, thank you. This is the Timeless Investor Show. This is our podcast piece on the great Andrew Jackson. Um, one of the things that was happening at the time was, one of his major moves to defeat the bank was to pull deposits from the bank. That was one of his big moves. He pulled all federal deposits from the bank. But then he redistributed it to what people called his pet banks. So banks that were perceived to be loyal to him, politically loyal, whatever. And a lot of those banks were on the frontier. And that money flowed into frontier banks. And as a result of them receiving this money, they themselves started engaging in very risky lending practices and putting money out. So all of this culminated in the specie circular, which basically required land to be acquired with hard currency, not with paper money, which caused huge runs on the bank on the frontier and sparked the Panic of 1937, which really, and Jackson was out of office at this time, which, we chatted about this before, but Van Buren was the president. Unfortunate for him during this time, and was known as Van Ruin versus Van Buren because of he was the president presiding over this thing. It's not really his fault. He inherited it from Jackson. So, the arguments here are multivariate. I've been engaged in it for days because everything we put out on social media. So I put out the Jackson post on LinkedIn and it caused vociferous debate. I was mentioning to you that this conversation on fiat, gold, central banks, no central banks is really akin to a religious discussion in that neither side is ever going to capitulate and they just are very firmly entrenched in their perspectives. I will say that the anti-central banking perspective takes a little bit of original thinking and creativity because the other side is what is the orthodoxy, right? Everyone is taught central banking is good, it's great. No one ever stops to ask, we don't accept government centralized control of any market in the West. We don't like it. So why do we accept government centralized control and like communist style controls of the money market? Why? Like, does I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
mean, that's always a question or a point that I tell people, we don't have a
Yeah.
central bakery. uh, system for producing bread. I mean, monopoly is anathema to a free market, and that's what the
Right.
Fed is, a monopoly.
Yeah. Right. And that, the argument for the Fed is that it creates more stability, which arguably is somewhat true. If you look at the track record of 1837 to 1913 versus 1913 to present, there are less crashes in that time. But you can also argue that under the Fed's watch, we have much larger and more dramatic crashes when they do happen. Um, and so, I think there's many ways to look at it.
I drew,
And I'm not,
sorry, Arie, I drew this chart up, and it goes back to like, interestingly, it goes back to 1833, uh,
yep.
and you can see the dollar was fixed, uh, and I mean, that there's that 1971 again, and
Yep.
anyway, sorry.
No, and honestly, some of the debates have been really enlightening. So, people argue we're better with the Fed because look at real GDP growth from 1920 through today versus 1837 to 1920. And my retort to that is the Fed's mandate is not long-term GDP growth. And the Fed is not responsible for the growth of the US since 1920 to today. There's many, many, many other factors: technological innovation, World War II, Britain surrendering its place as the primary power in the world, many factors that drove, and massive population growth, right? The boomer generation coming back from World War II. All of these drove huge growth. The question is, could it have been achieved without massive devaluation of the US dollar at the same time? Right? Like, was it possible to do that in a different system? And I think we've been so accustomed to our central banking system that no one even asked the question, was it necessary to do this with those charts you look at from 71 to today, where there's just this huge devaluation in earnings power and purchasing power over that time, which, one of the other arguments is, oh, well, there was definitely inflation in the pre-Fed period. Well, I think if you strip out the US Civil War period, that's not really true. There was actually deflation over that time but there was still growth. So then it's like, then it throws into the question of, is inflation necessary with growth? We've also been taught that you have to have inflation to have growth. Is that true? Wasn't true from the end of the Civil War to 1913, and there was tremendous economic growth. So,
Yeah, the Bank of England has an inflation calculator going back all the way to like 1270 or something. And if
yeah,
you,
amazing.
yeah, if you go from 1820, when they reinstated the gold standard after the Napoleonic Wars, to 1914, average CPI was per annum was minus 0.1. Uh,
Right,
and there was no depression. Yeah, central bankers nowadays, I think they and the economics profession, they're against deflation because in the fiat currency system, you need to keep inflating. That's
right.
the only reason why.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, so I mean, I guess in answer to the question of what are people to do, I mean, I'm biased. I own real estate. I invest in real estate. We have investors that invest in real estate with us. I think real estate is a fantastic hedge. I've been looking at Bitcoin. I'm sure many people in your audience are Bitcoin fanatics or really believe in it. Maybe you are as well. I don't know. A lot of merits to the system. I mean, at the end of the day, my struggle with Bitcoin was always, what is it? Like, it's a digital thing that's not real. I can't touch it. It's not a real thing. But then it occurs to me, what is gold? Except a piece of rock from the ground that society has collectively decided is valuable and worth something. And it is worth something. Like, if I offered you, 10 pounds of gold, you'd be happy to take it because it's worth a lot of money and people value it. And so it doesn't, like, as long as we collectively have trust that Bitcoin is worth something, then it's worth something. And that feels like a shaky foundation, but it is basically the foundation for gold. The only difference is gold has thousands of years of culture and history behind it to give it value. Real estate is interesting as a hedge because the input costs to build real estate rise with inflation, right? I mean, they're commodities. Commodities themselves are an inflation hedge, and they go into the building of real estate. So you have rising costs to replace. You have labor and wage costs, which are also rising with inflation, to build said building. And then you have a diminishing supply of land, which in many Western cities is also restricted, right? So I did a research piece a while back on the Timeless Investor, our Substack, applying the stock to flow ratio, which Bitcoin maxis talk about often and is a really cool ratio, but applying it to real estate. And it's interesting. So like we have a particular investment thesis on investing in left-leaning blue, you call blue in the US, blue states and urban core cities for the fundamental reason that local regulation and law make it really difficult to build, right? So Oregon, I live in Portland, Oregon, for example, the state has mandated urban growth boundaries. So you're not allowed to sprawl. You can only go so far, which means there is a very fixed supply of land that can actually be built upon at this point. You can't go much further. And they've also implemented affordable housing policies that crimp supply further. So, for example, in Portland, they say if you want to build a new building of more than 19 apartment units, 30% of them must be affordable housing units, which crushes the economics. And so it's interesting when they passed that law, we had the highest number of permits pulled for 19 or smaller unit buildings ever in the history of the city, and like no large buildings being built, despite a crushing housing shortage. And the city was thinking by mandating affordable units, we're going to create all these affordable housing units and it's going to be this utopia. But actually, they just exacerbated their housing crisis. So if you apply the stock to flow ratio of Bitcoin to housing in these cities, they actually have a much higher, stronger stock to flow ratio than Bitcoin. So, from my perspective, you're investing in an incredibly scarce asset that has real economic utility and is absolutely required and needed for society in a way that beyond like what gold or Bitcoin provide, because while they have cultural value and trust, they don't do anything. Real estate does something and it has value and has cultural value behind it. So to me, I think investing in real estate is what you have to do. And you have only to look at asset prices since 1971 versus wages and fiat to say you have to be in assets, right? And I don't think we're going to be rid of the Fed. I don't think we're going to be rid of central banking. I don't think we're going to be rid of rampant money printing anytime soon. So really it's how do you invest accordingly to protect yourself? And that's what we're doing. And that's kind of my philosophy.
Yeah, actually, on this channel, we're more into gold and silver than crypto or Bitcoin.
Sure.
And I mean, I did look and even own Bitcoin years ago, but like you, I have a problem with also who created it and where they want to take us. But also, yeah, gold and silver, I think is a good thing to have, of course, because it holds its value. And
Correct.
I don't know if you heard of Jim Rickards. He went a few years ago to Italy for like a conference with very wealthy individuals there, like families that have been around for sometimes half a millennium. And
Yeah.
he asked them, what's the secret for you guys keeping your power? And they said, land, wine, and gold. So
Wine. I love
yeah,
it. That's amazing.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think yeah, and most people though when you talk about real estate, they think well that's bad because it's risky because of the '08 crisis, but
Sure.
you need to be careful and manage your risk. You're not going to go and buy a property and put very little down. I think what you're talking about is more generational wealth. And unfortunately, here in the UK, even that is coming under threat.
Right.
Yeah. What about maybe you can give, yeah, so you don't think central banks are going to go the way of the dodo bird. You're probably right. But, and I don't want to get political. I just want your opinion on what's happening with Trump and the Fed. Do, it doesn't seem like, even though he's got Andrew Jackson's portrait in I think in the Oval Office, it doesn't seem
Yep.
like he wants to abolish the Fed. And like you said, when Andrew Jackson abolished or didn't renew the charter of the Second Bank of the United States, it led to JP Morgan and other bankers to actually regroup and become even more powerful. So We don't even
Yep.
know what the consequence would be. So, yeah, if we could touch upon that, if you have a minute,
Sure.
Trump and the Fed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I just want to point out you just addressed something that I forgot to address in your prior question, which is in the absence of a central bank, there's a power vacuum. Somebody has to step in. Somebody needs to be the lender of last resort, needs to step in and do it. And JP Morgan fulfilled that role. JP Morgan was effectively the lender of last resort through that period of time. And as anybody who's read The Creature from Jekyll Island and any of the other literature spawned from this period, that is partly why the Fed was reformed in 1913 and in 1910 when they met at Jekyll Island, was because if I'm JP Morgan, I don't want to be the lender of last resort. And it's a dangerous position from the beginning. And he was expected to step in and save failing banks and like solve issues. Um, so it's a very self-interested move on the banker's part. It makes an enormous amount of sense if you're a banker and if you're JP Morgan, it's what you would want, right? And the question for everybody is in this incredibly complicated world of international finance and bond and like all these sophisticated instruments, what does a replacement system look like? Because we will still have financial crises and we'll still have problems and politicians are always going as they should try to mitigate the harm and pain for people, right? And so part of the issue is without a central bank, what are the mechanisms, right? You can argue all day that free market economics will make the recessions fast and short-lived with recovery, but politicians are not okay with doing nothing while people are suffering. So the Fed gives them a tool to do something, right? Which is why I don't think it's going anywhere. So as for Trump, I mean, I think the reason that he talks about Andrew Jackson a lot and the reason he refers to him a lot is because Andrew Jackson was not loved by the elites, was hated by the elites, and he had a mission to blow things up, right? It was a great story. I remember learning this in middle school about when Andrew Jackson won the presidency. He threw a party at the White House, and the people that came were all like, you know, the small folk with their whiskey and fun, and like everybody was horrified by the party because it was very ungenteel. But Andrew Jackson was not genteel. Andrew Jackson was a man of the people, right? And there's a lot of reasons Trump would want to associate himself with him. A, man of the people. B, and here I'm going to venture a little bit into politics. Andrew Jackson was a war hero, right? He defeated the British at a meaningless battle after the end of the war, but it restored American pride and honor. There's a lot of reasons Trump, who actively deferred joining a war and avoided any sort of combat time, would like to associate himself with a man who was actually a war hero and actually did something great. So there's a lot of like personality reasons why he wants to associate himself with him. I don't think Trump has any interest in revoking the Federal Reserve. I don't think it's even on his agenda plate. I think he wants to manipulate the interest rates to help the US refinance its debt. I think it's very simple. I think he probably has real estate not probably. He has real estate himself that needs to be refinanced. Um, but more importantly, the US has a massive, massive debt bill coming up that needs to be refinanced. And manipulating the interest rates and getting them lower will help the US refinance its debt. We took on a lot of debt in the last decade. I just saw a quote this morning on how long it took the US to accumulate its first $1 trillion of debt, how long it took for the next trillion. And at this pace, I think we're adding $1 trillion of debt like at an unbelievably fast clip. And so I think a lot of what he's doing with the Fed is around trying to artificially suppress interest rates so we can refinance our debt. Um, but there's legitimate arguments that like the economy is not doing well, unemployment is rising. I think from what I see in real estate, I don't think the U.S. economy is doing well. I think under the hood, there's a lot of problems right now, and I think it's coming. So there is an argument for the Fed to cut rates just to spur the economy, if you will, and prevent unemployment from getting out of control. But as with everything, it's multivariate. There's a lot of different pieces to it.
Well, my conclusion from hearing you and listening to your podcast and what you wrote as well is that the only way forward financially is not to trust paper and trust
Agreed.
assets, be it real estate, gold, silver, whatever, something real that's you can touch, and feel, and that can produce also cash flow. That is real estate. I mean, I don't cover real estate that much here, but it's something that has worked for people long term. So Ari, thank you for coming on. I'd love to have you on again. I'm gonna keep following your Substack and your podcasts, and I'm gonna put them in the links in the description of this interview as well. And I urge the viewers to follow Ari.
Thank you, Mario. It's a pleasure to be here, and viewers, thank you for listening, and I'm delighted to share my thoughts with all of you.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you.